let's start with a puppet. Okay, so it's a very simple... I know, that's my job. It's a very simple figure, but straight away, everybody sees a person. Now, when I started working in theatre, I hadn't been told not to use puppets. I was just, the school I went to didn't teach drama, so I was just figuring it out myself, and no one told me that serious professional theatre people don't have anything whatsoever to do with puppetry in any way, shape or form. And when I did start using puppets, I found that the audience engaged with the stage in a different way, and you could see that they were sort of leaning in and they seemed to be paying attention, and then the puppet would go off and the actors would carry on talking to each other, and they'd go back to a kind of normal audience, and the puppet would come back and sort of lean in again. And at first I thought, okay, well, this is just the novelty value. They're not used to seeing puppets. They think they're for a children's audience, and so that's what's governing this. But in the engagement, they weren't laughing at it. They didn't feel awkward. It just seemed very genuine and enthusiastic. So I kept on using puppets despite the best advice. So what happens when you're watching one of these? Clearly, I'm picking up a bag of apples and moving it around on a table. But what I'm interested in talking about is what you're doing. And the audience are very active in this action. You're doing quite a lot of work. You're doing most of the work in imagining that this is a person. What happens when we watch a puppet that's different from watching an actor? We watch people all day, every day. It's pretty easy. And when you watch an actor on stage, it's a variant of that. You see the lady, the lights come up, she's sipping a cup of tea, she's a little bit nervous, her fingers are drumming on the table. The door opens, a man walks in, their eyes meet. The behaviour of the characters just builds up into a story, and so the story is built up out of the behaviour of people, and it's pretty easy for us to read. The first and most obvious thing that's different about the puppet performer is that it's strange. It's unusual, and it's giving you fewer signals than the actor was giving you. So the first thing that happens when you start to look at the puppet is that your brain has to wake up. You have to shift out of your normal, relaxed way of looking. And at some point you realise that this thing is supposed to represent a person, and you have to start a little guessing game. So the puppet walks on, he looks pretty relaxed, he's kind of ambling along. You think, okay, it's fine. He stops. Why has he stopped? He's seen something. No, he's listening to something. There's some sort of noise. And so each time the puppet stops or moves, the audience take a little guess as to what happens. And most of the time, if the puppet's being performed well, they get it right. And the next action kind of fulfills your expectation in some way, or twists it, or moves it on, and the building up of the story happens in this sort of dialogue of the audience guess, the action happens, the audience guess again, the action happens again. And each time you get that guess right, you get a nice little rewarding feeling inside. So that's what I was looking at when I was watching those people watch the puppets, when I was starting out. The audience are tuned in to respond to behaviour, just as a human being. As humans, we need to be good at reading people. It's something that babies start to do at a very early age. We need to be good at anticipating what they're going to do next. The human brain is wired to recognise consciousness in other things. So, you see a rustling in the bushes, you need to know quickly whether that is the wind or a snake, and you will watch the movement, and you're really tuned in, keyed to see something that is thinking and behaving in a way that relates to you. So that's what we're trying to do when we pick up the objects and start to move them around. We're trying to get you to see a consciousness in what we're holding. And if you enjoy mirror neuron theory, then arguably the audience are also not just analysing and assessing what this puppet's doing and the movements and the next step, they're also feeling it inside them in some way. So what we say is that when you're watching an actor, you respond to all of those things naturally. The strangeness of the puppet, the unusual form of it, the distance between what it is and what it represents, forces you to engage more fully, and it makes your brain and your feelings kind of stand up a little bit louder. It's harder and it's more fun. After several years of making this kind of work, I was lucky enough to start working with a company called Handspring in South Africa, who are a brilliant puppetry company who've been asking the same sort of questions for a bit longer than I had. And while I was working with them, they were invited to come to London to make a show about a horse. And they said yes, and we came, we made the show, and it's produced by the National Theatre here, and it's made by incredible artists in every department, and the directors and the designers and all the performers have been first class, and the collaboration has been really wonderful. Handspring made beautiful, beautiful puppets for that show, and I do urge you to find their TED Talk and watch that as well when you get home. And that was over 10 years ago, and the show's still running now. There it is. It's a very nice horse. My job with the show has largely been to do with finding the puppeteers, many of whom weren't puppeteers before we started working with them. And that process involves asking those performers what it means to be a puppeteer, starting to try and break down these questions of what happens when you move an object in front of an audience, trying to talk to them about what it feels like to be a puppeteer, and also at the heart of all of those questions is how are we going to get the audience to imagine the thoughts of a horse when we move our object around in the space. So one of the things that Warhorse did for us is that the directors had the trust in the puppet to put the puppet at the centre of the story. And frequently the puppets are used in theatre as a spectacle or as some kind of special effect. The lion comes on, it's terrifying, and then it goes off again. What was different about Warhorse, and what is different if you go and watch it tomorrow or this week, is that the horse is in the middle of the stage and a large audience are watching it, which is something that is unusual for puppeteers. So here's another puppet is going to join us, and this one is from James II, a production by the National Theatre of Scotland. Oh, look, there he is on the big screen. Oh, bit awkward step for him. It's you, James. So James obviously is a more complicated puppet than the bag of apples. And he's being operated here rather beautifully by three puppeteers who are quite experienced, Ben and Avi and Beatrice. But he's still quite a simple figure. So the joints and the mechanics of the physicality of the figure are limited. He hasn't got any facial muscles. He can't express most of the signals that you're used to reading. He's a sort of sketch of a person. The puppet is a tool. The puppet is a tool for these people to perform, but it's also a tool for you to help you imagine. So the proportions and the shape and the sculpture of this figure are there to help you with the journey of thinking about a boy who's somewhere between 7 and 11 years old. It's a little bit sentimentalized, but not totally. He's made in a materials that kind of suggest this medieval milieu that the play's set in. And with this sort of tool, which has got more coordination between the three puppeteers and in the figure, you can start to see a more complex narrative. They're able to play little moments of doubt, of hesitation, of anxiety, things that they're not sure about. And when you watch one of these puppets, what you're mainly responding to, although they do use language perfectly well, is non-verbal cues. And all of the tiny movements and shifts in your body that you do all day long, and you read and you give off all day long, it happens in this non-verbal sphere. And if you get onto the internet and look up non-verbal communication, people will tell you that between 65 and 80% of the communication that we do is through non-verbal means, depending on who you believe. And they're things like this: gesture, posture, the rhythm and timing of what you say and when you say it and when you make those gestures and postures, the tone in your voice, the tension in your body, the proximity between you and the other people or the other objects and things in the space, and your focus on where you're looking. So the puppet with its approximate body is limited in its ability to convey these languages, which forces the audience to work a little bit harder to read what he's doing. And the harder you work, the more you get drawn in. So as with other things that you might have found in your life, what you get out of it depends on what you put into it. And the limited nature of the sculpture of the puppet is forcing you to put more in. And so we feel that you get a little bit more out because of that. One of the things that's most exciting about nonverbal communication is how poorly we understand it. It's notoriously difficult to analyze. It's notoriously difficult to kind of categorize. Lots of it happens subconscious level. And the acid test is, are you seeing a consciousness? When it's working, you just see a little boy. You're not worried about the puppeteers. You're not worried about anything else. You're just following his thoughts. When it's not working, you see, and that happens all the time, you see a little bit of the awkwardness of the manipulation. You see a doll being moved around. So what we're looking for are those moments where you can really connect. And what that means that the job of the puppeteer is to not censor the stuff that's happening in their body. So these guys have to be feeling those thoughts, they have to be thinking those thoughts, they have to be feeling those impulses in their body, conveying them into the puppet, and at the same time slightly limiting how much they do them in their own bodies so that they don't distract away from the image. So the puppet is both an instrument for these guys to express those feelings clearly, and it's also a mold for you to pour your emotions into so that those feelings can get back off the stage and into the audience. Thank you, James. That's been very helpful. Thank you. Okay. So the other thing that excites us about nonverbal communication is that it's about detail, it's about honesty, and it happens on a microscopic level. There's no formula to making the puppet look sad. You have to feel it and see what comes out through the puppet. It's not like an 18th century acting manual where these positions will convey to the audience perfectly what you mean. And what we keep finding is that the inflections that really get the responses from the audience are the smallest ones, and quite often not the ones that you have planned out before you start the rehearsal or the process. So as the actors perform the show again and again and again, keeping in that mode of improvising, keeping in that mode of feeling the thoughts genuinely, really fuels the dialogue with the audience. So the horse is being successful in Warhorse, where we're able to explore some of those animal emotions in a big stage, has really helped us. And it's opened up a whole new sort of area for us, because directors are starting to say, okay, well, what if we do put puppets in important places in our shows? And so the James plays, where James was appearing for National Theatre of Scotland, is one of those. This show, Stille, which we made a couple of years ago, is still in the repertoire in the Residence Theatre in Munich. And it feels really good, because it's something that we haven't been able to do before, to really explore this and let it out. And we live in a world where the drive is towards generalization. We live in a culture where formula rules, whether it's in book publishing or blockbuster films or the makeup of your high street. We're invited to simplify things and generalize things in order to reach a wider audience. And what we're finding is that doesn't work for us. The only way it works in this kind of work is when you do it properly. It's when you really get stuck into the detail and let that detail ripple out into the work. And it might well be that generalizing and simplification gets you a bigger audience, but it might not touch them very deeply. The process of performing with one of these puppets feels like a dialogue with the audience. You're really aware that the puppet is there on stage and you're watching the puppet and the audience is watching the puppet. And you know that there's a dialogue happening. And that's totally different from what it feels like to be an actor on stage, or indeed giving a talk on stage. The contrast really is between this strange little pooled focus on the puppet figure and something that is more spectacular, because the spectacle knocks you back in your seat and it kind of batters you into a pleasurable state through an intensity of kind of barrage. And this kind of work is trying to somehow invite you up onto the stage, to identify really heavily with the puppet and think the thoughts that it's thinking and guess what it's feeling. Now, none of this is really new. Of course, it's been happening since puppets were invented, before actors started working. And it's been happening everywhere very quietly. And I think what's new for us is that we're being given a new focus to do it in. And it's not just in the theatre, it's happening in film as well. And after years of kind of so-so digital animation, the directors and special effects people are starting to try and put performers in puppets at the heart of the films again. And the advances in motion capture and performance capture technology are absolutely about getting a truthful emotional performance up through one of these digitally generated puppets. And a lot of our puppeteers are finding work in that world as well, because this transitioning of your emotions through to the physical state. So that's our future, I hope, is to explore what this new channel of puppetry can be for us. And the takeaway for me that we try and take into the work is when you make art, and by make art we mean do anything that you think is important, it is worth doing it properly. You know, the audience know whether or not you've invested that kind of detail, and we say embrace the detail, because what we keep finding is the audience know you could do it, you could get the effect more easily by using the formula, and they love it when you make a bit of effort. So the detail that you can pour yourself into is the big thing that we feel excited about and taking forward. So do pop in and see what the puppeteers are doing every now and then. It's a strange little world, but occasionally it has interesting things in it. Thank you.